Hello and welcome to Can We Still Be Friends, a podcast that tests the limits of the friendship between two people who mistake movie taste for personal morality. I'm Nate Goss here with Ryan Ebling. In this episode, we're using a listener-suggested movie for the first time, 1999's indie documentary classic American Movie. It's been a while since either of us saw American Movie, but when a listener suggested it, we were reminded of how badly we had been wanting to see it again. The film celebrates its 15th anniversary this year, and on top of being our first listener suggestion, it's also our first documentary.
And this film is a true indie. It wasn't a sleeper hit like Juno, say, which was a big hit, made a lot of money. This one made a modest $1.1 million, but it won the Grand Jury Documentary Prize at Sundance, and it was a critical hit. It scored, it's got an 84 on Metacritic. And it's often praised as an important film as far as the growth of documentaries as well as independent film. And without going too much into it right now, there have been questions raised over the years as to the intentions of the filmmakers regarding their subjects.
So we'll discuss. Is this film something to live for, as Jesus purportedly told me so?
Or are we just watching a poor soul repeatedly get his head smashed into a kitchen cupboard? Keep listening.
I was a failure. And I get very sad and depressed about it, and I can't be that no more. I really feel like I've betrayed myself big time. Because I think when I was growing up, I had all the potential in the world. Now I'm back to being Mark, who has a beer in his hand and is thinking about the great American script and the great American movie. And this time I cannot fail. I won't fail. It's not in me. You don't get second chances and mess them up. You'd be a fool to. Not just finishing films or in the long run getting some money, but it's right now. I feel like it's, like I said, 5, 10, 15 years ago. Now I've got the same options again, and this time I'm not going to fail. This time it's most important not to fail, just to drink and dream, but rather to create and complete.
And that was Mark Borchardt from the movie American Movie, talking about his vision for his film and art and
talking
grandiose.
Being Mark Borchardt.
Yes, being Mark Borchardt, man. So let's start off talking about how we felt about this movie before we rewatched it. We've both seen it, but it's been a while.
Yeah, and to just reiterate the beginning of our podcast, it was just a listener suggestion that we should revisit this one, and it just so happened to be 15 years old this year.
That makes me feel pressure because I want to know. I don't know what this person wanted us to talk about, so I hope we do it. We hope we do it justice.
The premise of the podcast has always been that it's something we disagree on, and then we come back and we revisit it. That's not really the case necessarily with this one. This is okay.
Yeah.
But
we've been straying from that since like episode 2.
That's true.
Whatever.
Yeah. We started off with a lofty goal and it's strayed since, but
we had to have a title for the podcast.
But it is one that neither one of us had seen for a long time.
I was excited to see it again.
Yeah, exactly.
So how did you feel before you rewatched it?
Okay, so my first time watching American Movie, it wasn't like, it's not like a movie that I had seen probably anywhere close to when it had came out. This came out in 1999. Mm-hmm. And I don't think I actually saw it though until probably, I saw it on Netflix. So it really it couldn't have been that, it was probably about maybe 5 years ago. Yeah. So still a little bit of a ways away. It had kind of diminished in my memory. But I do remember really loving this documentary. But it wasn't a very reflective admiration for it. Like, I basically loved it because I thought it was so damn funny. Yeah. Like, it was such a funny documentary. Mm-hmm. And that's about where I left it. And I'd never really even thought to think much more about it other than just to appreciate it as this really interesting, I guess you could call it a character study. Yeah. And that it was just very entertaining, and that this was a documentary that I could recognize as being in some ways somewhat new and groundbreaking for what it was doing with the documentary. At the time, that's how I felt. I kind of, since then, going back and watching a lot more documentaries that came out even before that, I don't know if I'd necessarily even say that. Yeah. But at the time, I really felt like it was probably something very fresh in 1999. Yeah.
Well, I think I said this in the last episode, that I actually saw this the same day that I saw Being John Malkovich. Mm-hmm. They were both in the new release at...
You must have been messed up after that day.
Yeah, I don't know. I really enjoyed both movies. But yeah, that is kind of funny. I was like
But
15.
for some pretty
I was
bizarre
like 15 or
movies
16.
to watch,
Yeah.
in one day,
Yeah. They are. Yeah. That is a lot of lunacy
to
on
take in at that
screen.
age.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I feel like I didn't really process it all that well. Like you said, I laughed. Like it was so funny when I first saw it. And Mike Shank is just unbelievably funny.
Yeah.
But my only experience at that time with documentaries outside of like school documentaries, which are so blatantly like informative,
Right.
had been limited to like This Is Spinal Tap and Waiting for Guffman. So for the first like 30 minutes, I pretty much thought that because it was so outlandish, the characters were so outlandish, everything was so absurd, I thought this was fake too. Like I never even questioned. And then
And it does have that kind of,
well, it's just so funny.
yeah, exactly.
That like it definitely feels like a Waiting for Guffman like kind of comedy. And so after
but
a while,
it has that style too. I don't mean to cut you off, but I mean it's not too far off. I mean in the style, in the sense that like you don't have voiceover narration.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
It's very much a fly on the wall
Yes.
kind of feel to the documentary.
Right. And so anyway, after a while, I said to my friend, I was like, I think they're really doing this. Like, I still thought it was fake, but I was like, they're really like smashing this guy's head into the cupboard door, and like he's really drunk. That's so funny that they would do that. And my friend looked at me like he was confused for a second. He's like, "Well, yeah, it's a documentary."
Because they're really doing it.
And so I'm pretty sure I wasn't quite ready at 15 for a movie like this. But this time around, I thought I would have some questions that I didn't think to ask the first time around because it was
Same
just
here.
so funny.
Yeah.
But that actually, the fact that I was unaware that it was a real documentary, that brings me, one of our listeners, actually, let's talk about what our listeners said about this. One of our listeners, thankfully, also thought it was a mockumentary for a while they were viewing it. So that made me feel a lot better.
Okay.
But Ben,
kindred spirits.
Yeah, Ben, one of our listeners, they hadn't seen it. He and his wife hadn't seen it. They watched it along with us, which is awesome. We love it when you guys do that. And he said that it seems like a wild caricature of what every artist feels like as they create. And I think you and I can maybe resonate with that a little bit.
Sure,
with music and some other things.
Yeah, absolutely.
And he remarks that even though Mark and he are vastly different human beings, Ben is working on his first full-length album, and he found himself understanding some of those struggles. And that's why I think connecting it to Spinal Tap was apt, and
Absolutely.
Waiting for Guffman.
Yeah, these are
because
both...
it just gets at that dream and frustration and like all that. It just really nails it. And Ben went on to say he was blown away in general by the interactions between characters, and that he found the story beautiful, a beautiful story about a fast-talking deadbeat artist and his best friends who make a film together. And then he does say at the end, thankfully to me, I'm comforted by the fact that he said, I'm still trying to cope with the fact that I started watching thinking it was a mockumentary and it's not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I remember thinking, even when I saw it on Netflix, that you see even the cover of it. I remember thinking this before I watched it the first time. It's this cover of these guys who look like they could be straight out of a mockumentary, but then it gives it a grandiose title like American Movie.
American Movie.
I could totally see why. I mean, I didn't fall into that because I had kind of just known the background of it before I watched it, but it's understandable.
Thank you.
I'll let you pass on that.
Thank you. Yeah. No, you're right. The cover is Mark Borchardt and
Mike Shank.
Yeah. Standing looking schlubby with American Movie just above them. And I don't know. I was duped, I feel.
We actually didn't get a ton of feedback about this episode, but I wasn't surprised by that because I'm going to guess that a lot of our listeners maybe haven't seen it before. And that was the case actually with one of our commenters, Dan, who basically just had, once we asked people to weigh in on our website, he weighed in by saying that he hadn't actually watched it. He was going to watch it with us, which again, like you said, really love it when you guys do that. But he brought up one of the issues that I think has maybe come up about the documentary over time. He said movies about sincere but over-optimistic struggling artists. And here he said he was inferring from a lot from the trailer because he hadn't watched it. But he said they always kind of bring him down regardless of how funny they're intended to be. Which I think gets at, one of the bigger questions that's been asked of the movie since it's come out, which is maybe what are the motives behind Chris Smith and why he was making this documentary? Why is it so funny? Because where's the humor coming from?
What are we laughing at?
What are we laughing at? Exactly. That's the question. I'm glad that Dan brought that up. And I hope that Dan, along with a lot of you guys, do watch it and give us your own feedback about what you think the movie is really trying to get at, as far as where it's coming from, what it's trying to say, and what we're really laughing at, where the comedy is actually coming from in this movie.
Yeah, and I think that might be also why it seems so easy to think it's a mockumentary, is just because for a after a while you kind of ask, are we really supposed to be laughing at real people? Like,
Exactly, like
we're
it's a
asked
Christopher
so
Guest
blatantly
movie.
to laugh at them. I think laugh at them.
Yeah.
And then the fact that they're real people with real dreams and real aspirations, it kind of
Yeah. Now, I'll be honest,
sours that a
these
little.
were the kind of questions I wasn't really all that concerned with when I watched it the
No,
first time.
nor I. I mean, it was
Those kind of questions had crept up on me over the years as I reflected back on watching it, but I hadn't rewatched it. So it's
Yeah.
almost like my memory had kind of shifted to still loving the movie, but being a little uncomfortable with that love.
Yeah.
Like not knowing what to really think about it.
Yeah.
And not really knowing what to think about the characters. And I'll call them characters, but they are real people.
Yeah.
The real people that are in this documentary.
Yeah,
you know?
I didn't mention this. I grew up in Wisconsin, and
Oh, yeah,
I have
yeah.
mentioned this. I mentioned that I grew up in Wisconsin, but
Did it feel real to you? Did it feel when you first watched it? Because you knew they were in Wisconsin when you watched it the first time, right?
yeah,
Like-
yeah. I mean, when they watched like the '97 Super Bowl and like all that stuff,
Exactly.
I was
Yeah.
right there. And it's not far from where I grew up. And actually, I there was a small movie rental place and music store in my hometown, and they had like an autographed American movie poster, autographed by Mark Borchardt and Mike Shank. And I remember one time Mark Borchardt was actually in the store, just talking everybody's ear off. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't making an appearance, although they did show Coven at this store, and like they had copies of Coven right alongside the documentary on the
Okay.
shelf and things. So it was a little surreal, because after I saw it, I was like, oh, these are real people, and that's them. That's what it's like, him right there.
Right.
And I mean, they weren't any different than they were in the documentary. Like, they weren't turning anything on, although I don't know if they would have that wherewithal to turn it on. I don't mean they're like stupid. They're just so genuine. Like, they're just like, they aren't anything but themselves.
Right.
ever.
Exactly. They're real people.
Yeah. Without agendas. And that's part of what makes me.
Should we get into the rewatch yet? Or
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So you
We
watched
were
this
just
this week in
transitioning
preparation
smoothly.
for yeah.
I watched it this morning.
Did you?
Yeah. I'm very
Nothing
busy.
like last minute preparation.
It was this morning. It wasn't like right before I
Oh, okay.
came. I mean,
You had a few minutes to think about it.
yeah. But and here's, I think, the tough thing about the documentary is that it isn't overt about anything. It isn't so clearly like ridiculing,
Mm-hmm.
because it gives so much time to his vision, and like the way people talk about him, it's really moving that people are
Mhm. supporting
supporting him. I think that's why it's so hard for me to say whether or not you're laughing at them or with them, or
Well, why don't we just sort of pull back a little bit
okay, sorry,
and just say you rewatched it.
yeah.
Did you still like it?
Oh,
Did you
pull
still
way back. Yeah, no,
Did you still
did
you still laugh?
Oh yes.
Okay.
I certainly did. Yeah.
So that's not really an issue.
I didn't. Yeah.
But more. But how'd you feel about the documentary? Did you like it? Would you recommend it?
I would, and I think the people who call it only cruel are being unfair to it. Is what I was trying to get at. Yeah. What did you think?
I still love this movie. I
Yeah.
think it's so funny. And
No reservations.
reservations until I thought it through.
Okay.
And then I spent a lot of time, because I actually I watched this probably a few days ago,
Mhm.
and I'd like to think of myself as not a cruel person.
Yeah.
So I did want to think through what I was laughing at, and I wanted to be reflective
Mm-hmm.
about whether or not it was cruel to be laughing at what was happening to these people on the screen. And I don't think that's an unfair question to ask. I think the documentary intentionally or unintentionally does leave it very open to for you to decide if you think this is cruel or not, or for you to really kind of decide basically like what to make of this. Now, I think that there are some things in there that really do set it apart from something like a mockumentary, from a Christopher Guest movie.
Yeah.
There's a heart to this movie, and
Yeah.
I'm speaking vaguely heart. I'll get more into that, I guess, what I mean by that later, but there's something about this movie that makes it much more compassionate. You know, you thought it maybe was a mockumentary, and I could see where you would think that, but once you realize that it's not a mockumentary, you really do see the humanity of these people come through. You do see actually a humanity in the actual vision of the person making this film, Chris Smith. Like I think that he actually does care for these people. I don't think he's doing it from a mean place.
That's interesting. Because I feel like I did not get a sense of the, from lack of a better phrase, authorial intent on it. I definitely saw, and I saw him,
him being Mark
Chris
or
Smith.
Chris Smith. Okay.
Displaying several sides of each character, each person, which not only, you know, made them more interesting and more three-dimensional, but also certainly humanized them and made them very sympathetic. Again, not in overt or saccharine ways, which is what I think elevates this documentary to really good art, above something that might have played a lot more heavily on certain aspects. But I did not get as strongly a sense, and maybe I just needed more time to mull it over. I did not get as strongly a sense of what Chris Smith's motivation and what his voice in it was.
Sure.
Which is probably good because it's a documentary, and maybe we've just gotten used to documentaries being so editorial.
And I think that's actually what, to me at the time, now I've watched other movies, like I said before, that came out before that I don't necessarily know if American Movie was groundbreaking. It certainly was, maybe in how much popularity it gained in an independent level. But we were so used to, whether it was documentaries you watched in class or whether it was Inconvenient Truth or Michael Moore stuff, everything had a message. Everything was actually, a documentary was made to tell you what you should think about something or to inform you about something, like in a Ken Burns documentary. It was just supposed to be an informative, here's an interesting things that happened at the Civil War.
Here's all the information.
Here's all the
Civil
information.
War.
Yeah. And here was a documentary, you know, not really informing you of anything of real value, really. I mean, just
on the surface,
just a group of guys in Milwaukee or around Milwaukee that that want to make a movie, and him doing it. No real heavy, as far as like no voiceover narration, as I said before, no real sense, like even with you know, what you would get with Werner Herzog, and like Grizzly Man, you get his exposition over all of it. You get this, and he's definitely leading you.
That's an essay, like that
exactly.
movie is,
This is just laying it out there.
Yeah.
And so it is you. I think you have to work a little bit to understand maybe what he's trying to say or where it's coming from. And maybe I'm reading too much into it by
maybe
thinking
we're
there's
not
something
supposed to figure out what he's trying to say.
Yeah. But where I realized, and it was actually after I rewatched the movie, that this movie is very smart in how it handles its characters and how it handles the comedy of its characters is, and I'm thinking we'll probably put a clip of this audio on the podcast, but there is, after American Movie came out, after it sort of gained a little bit of popularity, Mark Borchardt actually went on the Letterman show, David Letterman.
Oh, yeah.
And they were talking about American Movie, but really he was on because he wanted to sell copies of Coven, because he needed to sell copies of Coven.
Right.
When you see the handling of him as a character and the clip that they show to the audience, you really get a sense of what Chris Smith could have done with this if it was just for laughs, just for cheap laughs, to make fun of him. It is infuriating to watch, because what they do is they show the clip of Uncle Bill trying to deliver his line of, it's all right, it's okay, you know, the line that we all know if we've seen this movie. But we've seen the movie. We have, at that point in the documentary, we know these characters a little bit.
Their relationship.
What are you laughing in that? What are you really laughing at in that moment? And this is the key, one of the key scenes in the movie. What you are laughing at isn't necessarily that he keeps fudging up his lines. What you're laughing at is that Mark is putting him in this situation where he basically knows Uncle Bill it's going to be a struggle to get him to get this out.
Yeah.
Not only from the fact that he's going to have a hard time delivering this line, but from the fact that he's not even coming from a place that believes in this project.
Yeah.
And you're laughing sort of at this, and it's a sad laughter. I'll give it that.
Well, and Mark
But it's
Borchardt's laughing in that scene.
and Mark and
He's
Mike is laughing.
He's laughing
Yeah.
and like, oh, I can't even believe it. But that's what you get. If you watch the movie, you're laughing with them.
You're laughing
at
with
that.
them at that. And when you watch this Letterman scene, I mean, seriously, I was so angry because these people were just laughing at an old man who couldn't deliver his lines.
I think we have a clip of the documentary, and it's all about our next guest. So take a look here and just give you an idea who and what this guy is.
Okay, let's do take 7, man.
It's all right. It's okay.
Cut. Okay. You have to believe in what you're saying, Bill.
Did you? Well, I don't. I don't believe nothing.
All right. Give it some passion. It's all right. It's okay. There's something to live for. Jesus told me so. You did it before. You could do it again. Okay, this is take 8.
It's all right. It's okay.
Okay, that's fine. You gotta watch your teeth, too, because they clack a little bit when they loosen up in your mouth.
All right, that's him right there. That's Mark Borchardt. Come on out, Mark Borchardt.
And Letterman went with it. You know, I don't mean to make this into a podcast episode about Letterman, but it really did kind of make me lose a little respect for him because then Mark comes out, and Mark is Mark. He is exactly who he's going to be. He's the same person. But Letterman basically uses him as a ruse, as someone to just kind of be able to play around with for a few minutes to get some cheap laughs.
How was your holidays? I haven't talked to you since the big millennium.
Oh, well, we went to Detroit to check out Ted Nugent and Metallica, man, and it was...
You know, I bet I could have guessed that. You know, it just seems about right.
And this is a guy who was making, in that moment, a cheap shot on Mark. And Mark knew it. You know, you could tell that Mark was a little uncomfortable in there, but he was also still Mark, so he just kept talking. And from what I understand, reading up a little bit on it, he eventually did go on to even come back to Letterman and do like some correspondence stuff for the election. But I didn't see those, but I got to imagine it's just those are all about laughing at Mark as a person and who he is. And Chris Smith, there is an interview that I read in the Dissolve, a recent interview with him from, I think, February. Where
Chris Smith?
Yeah, and he still talks to Mark. He still knows him. It seems like it's a little odd.
Yeah.
It's a little odd.
I saw that interview too, yeah.
But you get a sense that that Chris Smith is someone who actually did get to know these people.
Yeah.
But you see what I mean?
No,
like
you're
it
absolutely
wasn't
right.
until I saw that clip on Letterman
That how it could have
that
been
I realized
handled.
it could have been handled even worse than it actually was.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Did you ever see the movie Storytelling by Todd Solondz?
I did not.
It's not a good movie.
Okay. Cross it off the list.
And Todd Solondz is a very difficult filmmaker to watch. I mean, his movies. I don't know about him personally. I've never seen him. But he made this movie Storytelling. And the first half or the first part of the movie doesn't really, I don't remember it having anything to do with the second part of the movie, except for the fact that it's got some images that you can't unsee. But the second part is about this kid who wants to be, interestingly enough, now that you said what you said, he wants to be like the next Conan O'Brien. He wants to be a talk show host.
Okay.
So he's like a teenager who's got this dream of being a talk show host. And so he's like trying really hard to be a talk show host. And Paul Giamatti plays a documentary filmmaker who follows him around and wants to like make a documentary. Like, I want to chronicle your journey and all these things. And Paul Giamatti like establishes this relationship with him. He really gets him to open up. His family life is terrible. Nobody believes him. It's a very, very similar to Mark Borchardt's story. And then the kid shows up at the screening of the documentary, not unbeknownst to Paul Giamatti's character, who had tried to keep him from it, and realized that everybody was laughing at it. And Todd Solondz, it seemed, and from what I can understand, because actually one of my distant cousins is good friends with Chris Smith, that movie was like a shot at Chris Smith directly. And the way it's portrayed in that movie is that he had to recut things to be funnier.
And I don't mean,
and sure, no,
yeah,
I'm sure
I
that there
do
were
think
things
Chris
that were cut
Smith
for
cut
humor.
things to make funny. I'm not going to deny that.
But
yeah.
it came from, it's not just because Mike talks slow and Mark talks fast and
Right.
like says some stuff. it really is about their personalities, because Mark and Mike, they're both very sweet people. Like Chris Smith, again, he doesn't lean on it. Much to his credit, he doesn't make it a turn in the documentary. But when Mark gives Uncle Bill a bath,
yeah, I noticed that too.
It's just like,
and there's nothing funny in that, really,
not at all,
except for maybe the toenail.
Well, but no, what's funny?
But by that
what's
time,
funny
you're not
is their
really,
relationship.
Yeah.
It's the way Mark and like Bill, like, you know, this is how they talk to each other. Even when Mark's giving Bill a bath, they fight, and like Bill,
Right.
but it's never anything bad. And then there were things that Chris Smith did that showed a depth of the characters, and it's just really, honestly, masterful storytelling. Like when he shows Mike coming to the Thanksgiving and he's smiling.
Mike, dude, what's up, man? I ain't seen you for a while. Your smiling face.
Yeah,
what the hell you got to say for yourself,
Happy
man?
Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving, man.
Yeah.
What do you have to say for yourself?
Nothing really.
What do you got in that bag?
Soda.
Soda.
Yeah.
Well, you're lucky we got all ends taken care of.
Yeah.
You look happier than hell, Jack.
Yeah, so do you.
Well, I ought to be, man. What do you know that we don't?
Well, I won $50 on a lottery ticket today. But I don't want them guys to know, because otherwise they'll want to borrow money from me.
And like, that's really funny, but it's also like really amazing that he unfolds it that way. And then in a less funny way, but again, really compelling storytelling way, the day of the Packers Super Bowl game, when Mark gets drunk and you see this anger that you've never seen before.
But it's very important to the movie.
It is.
Because which makes you realize the movie is much more than just laughing at Mark Borchardt.
Because, you're right, because in that moment where Mark is really angry and really like...
And out of nowhere, kind of.
Out of nowhere. And
at least that's how it's edited.
Right.
You look like
well, yeah. I mean, it is and it isn't edited that way, because you see him getting drunker and drunker.
True.
And you see him wanting to keep drinking, and then you see his mom telling him no, and then you see his dad telling him to watch his language, and like all these other themes that have been piling up, that people keep telling him no, people keep controlling him, people keep telling him he's not making the right decisions, people who make his decisions for him. And then all of a sudden it's just this outburst of anger at the camera, at us, at no one, at everyone. And it really grounds him in our minds, because up until this point, it could easily have felt like he is nothing but deluded and passionate for horror films, or passionate for something. Then in that moment, you realize that there is something from childhood that is keeping him going, that makes him want to succeed and prove everyone wrong.
Right.
And to realize his vision and realize his purpose in life. And it makes it really tragic.
Yeah.
But then also it makes you feel what you've seen other people display, which is, I want to help Mark do this.
Yeah.
Like, you want to get behind him.
You can't watch this and not want him to succeed.
Right.
You really do want to see at least Coven come together.
Yeah, right.
If not Northwestern.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And beyond that, beyond getting behind Mark, I think this movie honors anybody who has a dream and didn't give up on it.
Yeah.
And I think, I mean, for myself, I can say that this is true. I think everybody can say that it's true, that there is something they wanted to be or do that they gave up on. And Mark Borchardt isn't giving up on it.
Right.
And that's, even when he's working at the cemetery, he's still living for that dream. And the movie acknowledges that most of us don't go for it. And it's making a claim for admiring Mark. And I wrote in my notebook, or does it take a superior attitude? And I don't think it does at all anymore. It was just a fleeting question I had. But that's what makes this documentary stand the test of time. Like, it's not just funny. It's not sentimental. It's just super real and like speaks to everybody.
Real in such a surreal kind of way, because it's real in a sense where like this is real.
Yeah.
You can't make this stuff up, you know?
Yeah.
You couldn't make this stuff up. You write this stuff out in a script and someone's going to say this guy's way over the top.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. And I kind of feel like people have been, with the age of anti-heroes and TV and everything, like the David Brent sort of on The Office, the British Office, like, I don't know if American Movie was an influence at all. I know it was very close to that time when The Office came out in the UK.
Yeah.
But this like passionate dreamer who...
The audience almost has this super knowledge outside of the project that realizes that this person's probably not going to succeed.
Yep. Yeah.
And that, to me, I think is maybe where some people might get a little uncomfortable with what you're laughing at.
That's
because
true.
you do tend to, you just look at Mark and you look at the ways of the world and you say, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
You know, even though you want it to happen.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's where people are uncomfortable. It's not so much that you're laughing at this guy. It's that you're laughing at this guy because he's such a character, but you really wish that the world was a place where he could succeed.
Yeah.
You know, and
you
it's
know
just
he's not, and you just don't want to see him get hurt.
And that's the dark humor in it. Even in The Office, that's the dark humor in it. You know?
And I think the people who can't separate the humor from it and the mocking, like that you can laugh with and you can have that maybe dramatic irony sort of, you know, the outcome and this person doesn't.
Right.
But what I think this movie would be saying is that, like, who cares if it's not going to work out? Like,
he's going for it.
He's going for it.
Yeah.
This guy's doing something. There were a lot. You and I both watched Jodorowsky's Dune recently, and it's a pretty stark contrast because Jodorowsky had the greatest minds.
For a second, can you just explain?
Yeah,
for
sorry, Jodorowsky's
It's a
Dune.
great documentary. You should also check
tremendous.
out.
It came out this year. It's about Alejandro Jodorowsky, a Mexican film director who made El Topo and The Holy Mountain.
Yeah.
Some very strange... And I actually came out with a movie this year that I don't remember the name of. He was, in the 70s, hired to write and produce an adaptation of the book Dune.
Mm-hmm.
And he got H.R. Geiger, Dan O'Bannon, and Mobius, who went on to work on Alien, to design and help write this script. It had Mick Jagger in it. It had Salvador Dali, Orson Welles. Like, he just got all these people together to make this film. They ended up producing this huge book of
it was the whole film pretty much laid out.
Yeah, storyboards and designs.
It was basically to sell it so that the studios would at least see, okay, he's got a plan.
He knows what he's going to
do.
And long story short, the film never ended up getting made, but the book of ideas was so important that images from that proposed and failed project have come through movies like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Star Wars,
Alien, obviously.
Of course,
yeah.
Alien. I mean, the movie like had reverberations, even though it never got made. And so Jodorowsky was able to, go on to make other films and fulfill other visions, but he makes this point at the end that it never happened, but he wanted it to happen, and that was enough.
Right.
And he went for it. And he
have
says,
to try.
Yeah. He says, I want to live till I'm 300.
And that's not going to happen.
And it's not going to happen, but I have ambition.
Yeah.
And I saw that and Jodorowsky's not tragic in that story. He's triumphant.
Right. But that's just because
it's his person, because that's the way he talks, and that's the way, and he's made other movies.
And he's received validation through the years. Mark Borchardt has never received the validation. That might be the only difference.
Right.
You know?
And I think Jodorowsky's Dune and American Movie make the argument that failure isn't the worst thing that can happen to a person or a project. That if that person had never had the dream and never had the drive and never went for it, that would have been the tragedy. That would have been the failure. And I think a lot of us are willing to laugh at Mark Borchardt and say, oh yeah, he shouldn't have tried because look how we're laughing at him. But really the movie's saying, like, you haven't even tried.
Right.
And this guy is.
And in a way, it's like you can laugh at this guy all day long, but isn't he still a little bit of an inspiration?
Yeah.
Chris Smith doesn't make that fully obvious right away.
Yeah.
because it's just a very real documentary.
Yeah, it's he doesn't comment.
And I also think that his comments are very subtle. Well, maybe not so subtle, like the fact that the movie's called American Movie.
Yeah.
That it's taking this story that's really very small. It's about a few people trying to make a movie, but he gives it this grandiose title to basically say, this is America. This is all of us. This is, and
and
also
how often
a
does he talk
tragedy
about the
of
American dream?
Exactly. That this is Mark is always talking about the American dream.
Ahead of its time. It's 10 years ahead of its time talking about the American dream coming from somebody who's buried in debt.
Right. That's true too. Yeah. And also someone who's talking about the American dream and bringing in all these other different elements about what it means to think like an American. And I think what makes it so great is you're hearing it from someone like Mark, who speaks like an average American. Yes. He's not an intellectual,
he speaks
but he
like the
says
people I grew
some
up with.
really interesting things. Like there's the part where
he's
talks
well
about,
spoken.
in a way. He is. And another way, it's like, I get what you're saying, and it's kind of brilliant, but it's so funny. Like when he talks about his religion and how he's half Christian and half Satanist.
It feels like in a Christian, what Jesus would be saying, it's totally unchristian, man, to try to get ahead, because everyone's on an equal level playing field, an equal par. But you know what? I'm not a Christian. I'm half and half, man. Half's with the Satanist idea and half the Christian idea. Satanist, which is the pursuit of human endeavors, and Christianity, which is the pursuit of higher levels, you know?
But you get what he's saying.
Yeah,
he's
I get
talking
the
about
point.
there's a part of you that wants to be selfless and that wants to just live for other people. And there's the other part of you, and this is where the American dream comes in, that's maybe Satanist.
Yeah.
That says, I'm going to get what I want. I'm
Yeah,
going to do
I'm
whatever
going
it takes.
for
I'm
it.
going for it. And I'm going to get what I want. You know?
And you know what? There were some shots in Coven that were really good. Like those beginning, he was right that his black and white scenery.
The scarecrows looked great.
The scarecrows
At the
did
end,
look great.
The other thing that I thought is what 15 years hindsight gives you, and what I think is kind of unfair about questioning Chris Smith's motives with this documentary, is we're coming at it after 15 years of reality television.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Where people have willfully made themselves caricatures.
Yeah. And in that interview with Chris
That's
Smith,
true.
they ask him, do you think this movie could even be made today? Because everyone knows, they kind of have a general knowledge of how reality television works.
Yeah.
And that, editing can do whatever it wants with a character. I know that I kind of have to put my best face forward or it's going to put me in a bad position.
Yeah.
And I think it's unfair almost to even... I won't say it's unfair to ask the question about what Chris Smith's motives were, but I think that it's unfair to
Assume
think
he had
that
motives?
to assume that he had the same mentality
Yeah,
that a filmmaker
absolutely.
that a filmmaker today would have making the exact same documentary.
Right.
Because from what I understand, he was in a film class with Mark Borchardt, just thought he was a really interesting character.
Oh, really? Okay.
And said, I'm just going to follow this guy around while he tries to make his movie and see what happens. If I were to have that experience now, after all these years of reality television, the only way most people who would ever think to do that would come from is, I want to try to paint this person as an idiot.
Yeah, I want to make some money off of.
Whereas we don't know at all in 1999 if that would have even been remotely on his radar.
Yeah, that's a good point.
If it would have just been sort of no, this guy is genuinely an interesting character.
Yeah.
I'd love to just film this guy for a while and see what he does.
Yeah, yeah.
And if something comes of it, great. And if nothing comes of it, whatever. I don't have to try to edit it to make it say what I want it to say.
Yeah. That's a good point. One thing that I noticed this time around is that Mike Shank's soundtrack, because he wrote the music, all the guitar music.
It works.
It totally works. And I'm surprised Wes Anderson hasn't used some of this. Because it's like that, vaguely Renaissance fairish, tinkly sort of, it really worked for the movie, but also I think it's an untapped resource. I think people should use Mike Shank's music.
I think so too. It had this kind of in one of the part of the humor that came out of it was he was totally playing metal guitar on an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And so that has that sort of outsider element to it too.
Yeah. And I love Mike Shank, but I love these guys for being who they are, just for being for not caring that somebody was filming him while he practiced guitar blindfolded.
Right.
I love that. I love people who are who they are, and they know what they want,
and whether they're on camera or not on camera, it's going to make no damn difference.
The same thing.
Yeah. But the thing that I kept thinking about as I was watching that is there are people like that in the world. They're larger than life in a way. I mean, Mike is actually a very quiet person in a way, but they're these people that, if anything, you just want to get them on film so you don't forget that these people existed, that they were the way that they were, and that people are sometimes even more interesting than what we can possibly write in a script.
Yeah.
Sometimes just getting the right person on camera is going to be way more interesting than what the best screenwriter could write for a character.
Yeah.
Okay, so, we're talking about how there's no question to us, at least, that this movie is really funny. That these characters are really great.
And I'm relieved I can laugh at it.
Yeah.
Because there's stuff in there. Like the movie that he has called The More the Scarier. That's such a funny, clever title.
It is.
I love it.
I
feel liberated to laugh at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, oh my gosh, I laugh so hard every time Mike Shank does his scream.
Oh my
in the
gosh. That's so funny.
Ready, Mike? When I say take one, give it a couple seconds. Take one. That was wicked, man.
Yeah, that's one of the greatest moments in the movie.
The movie has so many great quotable lines.
Yeah.
It just has so many great clips that we could put on this podcast just to laugh,
Yeah.
But a question I want to ask for you is, if this movie is more than just laughing at these characters, I would just want to throw the question out to you. What do you think this movie is about, ultimately?
Well, I think I kind of mentioned, I think it's about that everybody has a dream, that everybody has something that they were aspiring to at some point in their life. There's actually this really amazing poem by Anis Mojgani that he kind of talks about this, that we all wanted to be something, that we all had these aspirations, we had these dreams of the way life was going to go. And the way he puts it, he says, before the outside world of parking spaces and dead friends entered in, and we forgot what we wanted and we became what we become, waitresses and bartenders and city employees in temp positions. And he was saying, he goes on to say in the poem that no matter what we become, we're something. We are what we're supposed to be. And I think there's something totally to that you don't let the disillusion of a dream dictate who you are. But I think what this movie is saying, in opposition to maybe what the poem is saying, is that you never let that dream dissolve, and you never give up on it. No matter what you've learned in life, no matter how you've learned to become disillusioned and disappointed, you should never let that keep you from going for what you want to go for.
Sure.
And I think that in that way, the American movie title is positive in that maybe oversimplified and overhyped American ideal of going for it, but in the positive way, not the satanic way that where you step on other people to do it, but the way that can enrich other people too. I don't know, because Mark Borchardt really is bringing a lot of people along for it. He's not selfish, really.
And my take is that I think exactly what you were saying is exactly right. But maybe not that American Movie is necessarily a positive title for the movie, but it's a complicated title.
Yeah.
Because here's the thing. I think that we can applaud and really root for Mark Borchardt and what he's going for, and just to do it and just to try it.
Yep.
But it comes at a cost. And no matter how driven you are towards your dream, there might be other things in your life that are going to get in the way of that. I don't know. It's very complicated because Uncle Bill also has a lot of points in what he says, even though he's coming from a completely different, almost nihilistic angle,
Yeah, well, that's interesting because Mark's got thousands of dollars of debt and he's going for it, and he believes in things, and Uncle Bill believes in nothing.
He's got all this
going
money
for nothing, and he's got over $250,000.
And what I think is a really beautiful touch at the end is just where it says that he died and then he gave Mark all his money. So it's basically the money that he was asking for. It's just kind of this recognition of, and this goes back to the poem you were talking about. Does everybody have that dream? Or are there people like Uncle Bill or the brother of Mark?
Right.
That just sort of
brothers
recognize the world for what it is, settle into what they're supposed to do, become who they are.
Yeah.
And then almost get annoyed at the people who do dream more.
Yeah.
But then at least Uncle Bill at the end of the day is able to say, you know what? That never happened for me. I never really felt it. It never did anything for me, but you are so enthusiastic about this. Just take what you need and just go for it, you know?
Well, I don't know that we could say that they never had the dream, because I think even though they never say it in the movie, it's not uncommon to hear people say, you think I wouldn't want to go, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Everybody had at some point.
It's true. Maybe it's just a little further in their youth, and some people hang on to it a lot longer.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what the movie's about, is the people who
Mark's
can't let
30.
go of that. Yeah.
He's not real old.
True.
But you're right. It's complicated. It's very complicated. To say that the American title is good or bad is very difficult to say.
Really, maybe what the movie's even asking is, what is the American dream? Is it more like what Mark's laying out, or is it more like what the brother's laying out? Is it more like the American dream is, if you dream it and you want it, you go for it? Or is it more like what the brother's saying, whereas in America, everyone has a way to just basically get by? You know, that even Mark, a person who by the family's own account is maybe a little bit of a loser, that there's at least a way for him to get into a factory job and to make a living and to have a decent family.
Yeah, well, that's another way that I find Chris Smith being very sympathetic towards Mark, is that he lets his brother talk.
Yes.
And his brother, his brother honestly at one point says that he didn't think Mark would amount to much more than a serial killer. Like,
oh wow, yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, yeah.
Can you imagine growing up with that attitude and still want to make your movie?
Yeah.
Then you understand that anger when he's drunk.
True. That's very true. Yeah.
But then his passion is so much more admirable. Like, how have you not gotten beaten down by now?
Yeah. All right, so we talked about a lot of stuff with this movie. It does actually look like that on our rewatch. We found a lot more in it than maybe we gave it credit for at the beginning.
Oh yeah,
when we first watched it years ago.
Honestly, well, I think through our discussion we found a lot more than
and with all of you guys weighing in with everything too. So that always helps us out a lot. So yeah, again, give us your thoughts about your own thoughts about American Movie if you rewatched it and what you thought about it. We are on Facebook, we're on Twitter. Go on our website,
CanWeStillBeFriends.net.
Exactly, and comment on the episode itself. Give us a phone call. The number is on our website, and leave a message, and you just might actually end up on the podcast.
Yeah.
Ryan, do you want to maybe talk about what we're actually going to discuss in our next episode of Can We Still Be Friends?
Sure. We're trying to be a little topical, not movie-wise, but news-wise.
Yeah.
News of the
Stuff's
world.
going on outside of movies.
Yeah, believe it or not. But we still found a way to tie it into movies. So in the UK, Scotland is...
they're going to be voting.
Yeah,
for
they're voting
independence,
right? To not be part of the UK anymore. That vote's coming up. So in honor of that, Nate is making me watch a movie I have never seen before and haven't actively been avoiding, but have not certainly been seeking out. And that movie is another great movie for Scottish freedom, Braveheart,
which is a movie that I was thinking to myself, wait, why are we voting for something? Didn't the movie Braveheart tell me that we got freedom?
Yeah, no matter
Spoiler
what,
alert,
no matter what happens, I believe.
Isn't that
famously?
Even, yeah.
No matter what, they can vote us down, but they can never take our freedom.
Yeah, something like that. I believe that was the last lines.
Yeah.
And honestly, after a lot of our discussion that happened in our previous episodes of Gladiator and talking about historical epics, I don't know. I got a feeling, Ryan, there's a good chance
this
you're
going to be the one. Oh, that I hate.
That you're going to hate. You're going to hate this movie.
No, I don't think so. I disagree with you. I thought you were going to say something I didn't agree with.
And this is a movie that I haven't watched in years, and I remember loving. It was actually one of the first movies that got me into movies, but I'm a little scared about rewatching it. I don't know how it's going to hold up. And hey, there's the whole Mel Gibson thing.
Yeah, so it'll be an interesting one. I am going to watch it.
And I know there are opinions about this movie.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
You all have opinions about this movie. I know that if you've seen it. If you haven't seen it, watch it with us so you can discuss it and talk about it with us. But if you have seen it, we want to hear what your thoughts are about Braveheart. If you've seen it recently, what your thoughts were when you first saw it. So please, we'll put up a post on our website.
If you want to either poison the well or sweeten the pot for me, try to get me to think one way or the other before I watch it.
So yeah, and really quickly though, we did want to actually talk a little bit about our last episode, Garden State, because we got a lot of great feedback about that,
was
and
awesome.
I was going to actually ask you, Ryan, if we actually had a really good discussion, I think, about all sorts of things, especially about where we were coming from and what that movie did for us in that age. Anything changed since you watched it at all, or any more further reflection at all?
Well, no, I don't know. I guess the only thing that maybe changes is that I feel more compassion for Zach Braff than anything else.
Sure.
Still really don't care to see the movie again.
Yeah.
And wouldn't recommend it.
What I would recommend is, and I don't recommend this for any other website but our own, is to actually go to the comment section on our website. And
what other websites are there?
Go to canwestillbefriends.net and actually look at the episode and see some of the comments that were being thrown down about some of the thoughts after listening to it, especially somehow Life Aquatic got thrown in there.
Life Aquatic and Napoleon Dynamite.
We also had a really good, good and lengthy comment that's definitely worth reading from Steven, giving the whole background of the manic pixie dream girl, and the criticism that even came after that about how we interpret that and what that means. Definitely worth your time.
And then I should probably mention my sister-in-law, Lindsay, left a nice comment saying that she felt after she saw Garden State in college, she had moments in her life that reminded her of Garden State, just those odd moments.
Yeah, she mentioned the hardware store thing, exactly. Yeah.
And it's true, there are those moments that seem to only happen in college that are like, this wouldn't happen any other time. So maybe Zach Braff was trying to nail that moment. I'm giving him too much credit. I've taken too much compassion on Zach Braff.
Yeah, and Scrubs had the first anti-hero, right?
Sure, probably, yeah. Without Scrubs, there's no Breaking Bad.
True, yeah, you heard it here first, folks.
Anyway, we love hearing what you guys have to say, and we are looking forward to what you have to say about
American Movie. In our next episode on Braveheart, please weigh in. And we're just really glad that you guys are actually doing this. You're commenting, that you're watching the movies with us, that you're commenting, and
I'm
repeating myself.
We love it. It's late. We're tired. Thanks for listening.
Yeah, and we'll catch you next time.
Sure.